Kids these days, kids, get off my lawn. We got to be careful we don't do that because we actually need to be there for them. That's legit. And I think this conversation helps us get to that place. First of all, I have to tell you, I'm very excited as a fan of Downton Abbey. My guest right now's name is Andrew Grantham. I have to tell you, it's royalty here on the show today. Andrew, how are you?
Good. My surname has got me far. That's pretty much it.
I bet it. That's fantastic. An official aristocrat. How fancy. Andrew, appreciate you being here. Andrew is a senior economist at the CIBC, and we're here to talk about kids. Kids, AI, big problems, little problems. Andrew, what are we staring at?
Yeah, so I mean, we just looked at the youth unemployment levels. The 15 to 24-year-olds, they're finding it really tough to find work at the moment. And, when there is weakness in the economy, which there is at the moment, it is always the case that young people, unfortunately, they suffer the most in terms of their job prospects because they are the new entrants into the labor market. They are looking for jobs. But what's been very unusual about this current situation is just the scale of how much young people are suffering relative to other age groups. The unemployment rate for young people is near recessionary levels, and for other age groups, it isn't. So it's the scale of just how much young people are really suffering and finding it very difficult to get jobs in the current environment, which is the reason why we started kind of looking into this.
Right. So if traditionally softer economy means that, I sort of imagine it like a sliding scale, right? Like the more experienced workers start to slide down in the jobs as jobs disappear. I mean, you have somebody who might have 20 years managing in retail, but because something went wrong in their business, they're now the greeter at your store, right? So things start to slide down through the course of soft economy. And if this is the case, and we're seeing it already, that leads me to believe there's maybe a new force or an external force that might be affecting this differently. Do we have that?
Yeah, and I think we do, and there's a couple of them. So in economics, everything is supply and demand, right? So there's some supply factors, there's some demand factors. Just to put it into context, whenever we have a rise in the unemployment rate nationally, the unemployment rate for young people normally increases about twice as much because, as you said, there's that sliding scale. What we've seen over the last kind of 3 years since 2022 is that the increase in the unemployment rate for young people has actually risen 3 times as much. Like that extra 1 times is the thing that can't be explained through a weak economy. So what can explain it? Well, there's a supply factor, and that's the big population growth we had, the big increase in student numbers between 2022 and 2024. That is part of the story. Basically just down to simple economics, too many people chasing too few jobs in terms of too much labor supply and not enough demand. But that doesn't explain all of it. And the reason for that is, we've been restricting those student numbers for almost a year now, or about a year, and yet the youth unemployment rate has continued to increase. So then we started looking at, okay, so what other factors could there be? And what we've seen, or what we've got some evidence for at least, is that maybe some of the technological changes that have been coming through, use of self-checkouts in retail, for example, use of AI to do some research in some professional services, maybe that is actually taking away some of the part-time and entry-level jobs that young people typically do.
Let me propose something to you that I've heard recently from business operators that might contribute to this. No research behind it, just anecdotes. But I think we need to allow this to be space. Is that the generation before you and I, Andrew, we used to call us the young kids that didn't want to work, right? And then our generation calls the next generation the young kids that don't want to work. Like, I understand that it's always been that way. Here's what I'm hearing anecdotally through stories from business operators is that it is so difficult to motivate and champagne dreams and a Pepsi income with a younger generation that doesn't want to be there on time. They won't get off their phone. They don't respect time management. They don't respect hard work in the workplace and all these different things. Is it even possible that some of these business operators would rather have and wait for this to pull down from that sliding scale employees and just go with less employees because it takes so much work to get them motivated? or to implement technology to replace the fact that kids are on their phones, they don't want to work hard, they're not committed to making sacrifices like we've seen generations gone by.
Yeah, well, there's no economic data on time spent on your phone during a workday,
There
to be
should be.
honest. So I'm not sure there's I can back that up with any facts. The one thing that I have heard kind of related to that though is not just that not that young people are not working hard, because I'm not in a position to say they do or they don't based on the data that I have, but that they don't want the jobs. They're not participating in the labour market. And we have seen that participation rates for young people have come down as well. And actually, if they hadn't, their unemployment rates may have gone up even more than they have. Now, is that because they don't want jobs, they're lazy? I'm not sure about that. I think, a lot of the time, a decline in what we call participation is because people get disengaged. There's no jobs out there, or at least not the ones they want to do, and so they stop looking. It's typically that way round rather than the other. But, going back to that population growth that we've been discussing as a supply side factor, if companies are worried about young people and getting them to work, whether it be, again, because of laziness, I'm not sure, but maybe they prefer to have one full-time employee rather than two part-time ones, then that population growth that we saw between 2022 and 2024, it enabled them to have that certainty rather than using those part-time workers. So that is part of the story as well.
I realize you don't have this in front of you, so it's an unfair question, but there's got to be some info. I'd be curious to learn, Andrew, about things like side hustle income, online income, making money in non-traditional ways where we don't need a job. There's, salaries is a great example. You see all kinds of research on what salaries do for people and what regular salaries in sort of hurt people with mentality around earning, right? Like if you really want to hustle, don't guarantee that paycheck by Friday, right? So some of these young kids have been incredibly entrepreneurial and industrious and getting online and making money. I would be curious to learn what kind of research is out there for those people and how that affects our traditional job measurements.
Yeah, and to be honest, I don't think there's enough information on that, because that could certainly be part of the story. One thing that we do know and we do have information on is the people who tell Statistics Canada whenever they're doing these surveys, they tell them, am I working a second job? Now, that could be a traditional job, that could be a second form of income, but the data that we get is reliant on people telling StatsCan that rather than maybe the side hustles. But what we are seeing from that data is that people are working a second job to a greater extent than maybe they typically are. And whether that just is, it's easy to do that because you can do it via the internet, or whether it is a need because the economy is not very good, so they need that second job. It's difficult to say, but those second jobs, the proportion of people working more than one job, those numbers have been increasing.
Well, and it's a bit of a conspiracy thing, but I don't think a lot of people want to answer to StatsCan honestly when CRA can check the profile. I think that those are legitimate thoughts that people would go through in the world today. Andrew, is this big? Is this a big deal? What's the outcome if we don't fix this?
It is important that we try and fix this. Now, I've mentioned that there's different supply and demand factors. Can we explain some of this with AI? Can we explain some of this by the big surge in the population? Even if we can, the overriding issue for young people is just how weak the economy in general is. That is still the biggest factor, even if it's not the only factor. So if the Bank of Canada starts cutting interest rates, we start to stimulate the economy. Hopefully some of the trade uncertainty that we've had in the first half of this year, hopefully that kind of eases, the economy accelerates, that will be good for young people. Why is it important to fix this? Well, if a young person's income today is low, that can affect their income in the future. So we need to fix this as quickly as possible to make sure that young people in the future are earning a decent income.
Andrew Grantham, Senior Economist, CIBC, Young People in the Workplace. Your Highness, it's nice to meet you.
Excellent. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here, bud.